Bianca, the OG Cork Dork, now art explainer, enthusiast, just everything, artiste extraordinaire. Welcome to, well, your first time on Extra Shot, but welcome back to being interviewed by me on a podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and just thrilled to be back.
This is basically, I think, why I started this podcast, was so I had a good, legitimate reason to reach out to people doing fascinating things and be like, let me ask you all the questions I have about it. And that is what has happened with your amazing book that I just couldn't put down and have been insufferably telling everybody I know that they have to read it.
Thank you. I mean, I don't find that insufferable. I find you're doing God's work. So thank you. I appreciate it.
So before we get into the art world, which is what I'm so dying to ask you about, I need to know what you are obsessed with at the moment. Last time we spoke, you gave me a long list of things you were obsessed with. And I want to know, what are you, a person who is obsessed with obsession, what are you obsessing over right now?
Oh, so I would say one recent obsession of mine is jellyfish. Like, jellyfish are freaking mind blowing. I've been trying to figure out how I can find a way to dive into the world of jellyfish and write about them, but they're basically immortal. They also wreak havoc on, they've been known to capsize ships. I think more people die every year from jellyfish stings than sharks. Like, they're this force to be reckoned with. And I think there's something so magical and unknown about the ocean. Everyone's trying to go to space, but we really don't understand the ocean. So that's one thing I'm obsessed with. The other thing I'm obsessed with, this was another question that came to me circa 2:45 in the morning while I was up with my young child, is why do young children hate sleep? So this is another question that's been rolling around in my mind. What else I'm pulling up? I always have like this, I think I described myself last time we talked as sort of like fly paper. And so there's always just like, my brain is just waiting to stick onto things. The biggest cruise ship, I read recently, there's like the new biggest cruise ship in the world. Like, what is going on with that? Seeds, apparently, everything from seed sabotage to the seeds going extinct. My brain sticks on a lot of different things, but those are just a small handful. And then, of course, art. This, as I'm sure we'll discuss, but this journey of throwing myself into the art world for my new book, Get the Picture, has really ended in a love story, which I didn't know where it would go in the end. But you'll find me on any given day seeking out art everywhere from galleries to the side of the street.
I mean, you do describe in your book this kind of active looking. And so I do just picture you like in your house, like looking at like a spot on the floor for at least 5 minutes, trying to describe it. Are you doing that actively these days?
Yeah, I will say that there's, it sounds insane, but in the course of working on this book, I worked for galleries. I spent a lot of time painting white things white, and communing with walls. And it started because I was working for this gallery, and they're having me repaint the wall for a new show. And that really started this weird obsession with looking at walls. And so, yeah, there's a lot of time that I spend. I do have other things to do with my time, but at the same time, there are these moments where I catch myself, looking at the way the light is falling at a wall and just trying to figure out, like, how would I describe this white? Like, it's not a white wall, it's even now I'm looking at it, I'm like, it's not just black, it's gray. It's like, is there some green in there? I mean, there's just so much beauty, I think, to watching how the consistency of light changes over the course of the day, and the colors that present themselves in the most unexpected way once you really stop and pay attention. And I think art helped me do that. But it's a weird hobby. It certainly is a weird hobby, just the sort of like staring and trying to deconstruct the mystery that exists in a wall.
I'm sure New York you fit right in. Like, in New York, you could just be staring at something for a long time and nobody's even going to jostle you on the street because people are like, oh, that's in New York, anything goes. That's always how I feel in New York.
As long as you're avoiding eye contact with strangers, I think you're fine.
Exactly. I was in your hood, actually, when I was there very, very briefly for less than 24 hours in November. And I walked maybe 30 blocks and I passed 2 stores that sell only clothes for dogs. 2 stores. So if that's not a sign that anything goes in New York, it is. So, okay, before I get deep into my many questions I have after reading the book, this episode is going to air on your pub date for Get the Picture. So not everybody is going to have been as fortunate as I have been to read it. So why don't you give me your spiel? What is this book about?
Yeah, so I'd say this book is about the years I spent disowning my normal life as a journalist to sell art at galleries, help artists in their studios as a studio assistant, patrol museums as a security guard, embed myself with collectors, lots more. All of this is part of this journey to really understand, why does art matter and how can any of us engage with it more deeply? Also, to discover just how messy the fine art world really is, as you probably know from your own experience working in it. It presents oftentimes a very buttoned up exterior, but underneath, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. Fascinating things, unethical things, life-changing things, inspiring things, you name it. And so I think this book is sort of part user guide to the hidden logic of this world, and also part quest to learn how to live life more beautifully. And I think beauty tends to get a bad rap in the art world. Even beyond the art world, there's this idea that beauty is somehow untrustworthy, unserious, a little, at best a luxury, at worst something corrupting. And I came to find that beauty is actually really essential. And I think art, perhaps counterintuitively, is this amazing gateway to living life in a more expansive, more beautiful way, in a way that can involve staring at walls at times.
Yeah, and it works. So I'm not going to spoil the book, but I need to kind of pull up some things. So you are having your own My What If Year, except much, much deeper. And the book is extraordinarily funny and very, very well written. So you kind of start out trying to figure out how you're going to figure out the art world. And everybody is telling you, you can't, you've got gates coming up everywhere. Keep out. We don't want you here. Stay away. And your first experience is working with a man named Jack, whose surname is in the book when people want to read it themselves. And, you have this kind of, I think mostly extremely hilarious experience working for him and kind of getting under the skin of that real trend-setting gallery, what it's like to work there. So has Jack read the book yet? Like, I really want to know what he thinks about the book. And have you shared this book with all of your art world folks who were so afraid of you coming into their world? Have their fears been founded, or are they just going to have to read it with the rest of us?
So yeah, the book is making its way into the world, and it's hard to know, in this early stage, who's read it, who hasn't read it. So I want to back up and first explain that I recognize that the research I did for this book was rather atypical. And I have to say that, at the outset of what became Get the Picture, art and I were not really on speaking terms. I spent a lot of my adult life really not understanding how to do art. And a lot of times, I would go to galleries and museums, and I really felt like I was at least 3 master's degrees and a few tattoos away from figuring out what was going on. And, at this point in my life, I will confess that didn't totally bother me. I mean, I was living this really hyper optimized existence that didn't make time for frivolous things like art or bathroom breaks. I was the sort of person who did a lot of texting from the toilet while listening to podcasts on 2x speed. Maybe some of your listeners right now can relate.
They are on the toilet.
Stopping in this moment, they're like, what? That's me.
Did you see me?
Yeah. And I don't know that anything would have changed, except I happened to stumble on this collection, this painting that my grandmother had done, inspired by her time teaching art in a displaced persons camp as a Holocaust survivor. And it really set my brain into this tizzy of wondering, whether art, which I'd always considered a luxury, was perhaps more essential than I'd assumed. And I was really intrigued by the way that scientists were right there with her and arguing that art was a really fundamental part of our humanity, as necessary, as one person put it, as food or sex. And this was not a feeling I could relate to, but I started, deciding, hey, let's try this art thing again, sort of showing up again to galleries, museums, openings. And the art was totally befuddling to me, but the people around it were fascinating. They picked fights with the color blue. They maxed out credit cards to show these hunks of metal they swore could change the world. And I'd never met a group of people willing to sacrifice so much for something of so little obvious practical value. And yet, as I passed these art fiends, oohing and eyeing over sculptures of like a mutilated chair, let's say, I kept wondering, why? Like, why does art matter? And, interacting with a few smears of rock on cloth, or a painting, as you may call it, the technical term, if you will, can that really transform our existence? And, I decided, like, I wanted to know also, like, these people sort of acted like they'd access this trap door in their brains, and it made my hyper optimized existence feel totally claustrophobic in comparison to their expansive worldview. And so I started to wonder if I could see art and perhaps even the world the way they did, and what would change as a result. And so I first started reaching out to people in a more traditional way, which is just say, hey, will you talk to me, right? Can I interview you? Can I ask you what I considered some pretty basic, inoffensive, fundamental questions, like, why art? Like, how do you do art? Like, how should I look at this? And I was really taken aback by just how secretive the art world was, and just how reticent people were to sit down with me and have these pretty basic conversations. I got threats. I had many closed doors. Eventually, even as people started talking to me, I had people, offering a lot of voluntary constructive criticism about all the things wrong with the way I dressed, or the way I spoke, or even my overly enthusiastic personality. And I will say that those conversations convinced me that I needed to go deeper. I needed to really figure out what was going on here, because I also think that it became clear that to understand art, I also had to understand the art world. And, I think that there was, I was going to say and at the same time, as a journalist, the more someone tells you to keep away from something, the more determined you become to get inside and figure out what is going on. And so, it was a very, I was really fortunate in the end to find really generous, exceptional people who were willing to open up their doors and their rooms and their studios to me and my notebook and my tape recorder, to really explain what they considered art's role in our lives. And so, it's, I just felt, especially after doing Cork Dork, it really convinced me. It's like, it's one thing to hear someone explain to you how to sell a painting. It's another thing to, be negotiating with millionaires during Art Basel and selling photos from the back of an Uber while people around you humph up lines of cocaine, which is what I ended up doing. Those are very different experiences and windows onto art's role in our life, and how we can make it a part of our lives, and also why we should even bother to do so.
The type of writing that you do, and particularly your book length projects, Cork Dork and now Get the Picture, requires this complete immersion, right? So you are not a dispassionate journalist. You were in there painting that wall white hundreds of times. You were posing, you were selling the art, you're very invested, and you really gave everything for these jobs that you were doing. I mean, the way that you describe it, you were out night after night after night. You barely saw your husband. You were 100% in it. So I have two questions around that. The first is, at least in the way it's written, it's you kind of take us on a journey that feels like you didn't know where it was going to end when it started. Is that the case? And if so, that kind of investment up front, not knowing where it's going to go, what does that feel like for you? And the second question I have is, you have a kid now, which you didn't before this happened. Do you think you could do this again now that you have a child?
Yeah, they're great questions. So I would say, first of all, I don't know where the journey is going to go for so many different reasons. I mean, first of all, I think for any piece I write as a journalist, I believe in keeping an open mind. I mean, what's the point of doing the research if you know where it's going to end, right? I think the point is, the projects I do, they start with questions. They also start from this moment where I feel like I've experienced something seismic, some sort of seismic disruption in my soul, where I've realized, holy crap, like, the world doesn't it's like, how do I describe it? It's, I think that a lot of the articles and books that I write begin from this seismic moment I have in my soul where I suddenly realize, holy crap, maybe I've thought about this fundamental thing all wrong. And so, it's nonfiction. Like I don't know where it's going to end. I don't know who I'm going to meet. I don't know what I'm going to find or where things will lead. And I think that the result is, unfortunately, I think not the most efficient research process, but I do think it makes for a much more honest, nuanced, and hopefully richer one for the reader ultimately.
I
and I
don't
think
want to
that,
read your efficient version of the art world. I'm in it for what you gave us.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I think as you see from the book, it's like one experience shapes you and leads you to the next. It's like after spending time working with Jack, like it left me hungry to really understand, to kind of like, I see, if you read the book, you'll see that like after working with Jack, it left me incredibly hungry to get up close and personal with the process of making an artwork, to sort of clear away all the other things, all the context, all the conversation, really understand fundamentally, why did you pick this blue, right? Why did you put this cloud here? Or when I met Mandy Allfire, performance artist who sat on my face, right? It's like that I certainly did not see coming.
Literally,
but it
she
kicked
literally
off,
sits on her face.
yes, right. This is not metaphor. Yeah. And, that kicked off all these questions that honestly, I kind of would rather not have had to deal with, but I think are really critical. What is art, right? How do we define it? Where does art end and stuff begin? Is there a boundary there? So yeah, I think that there's just a kind of openness that is really required. And I'm someone who really does all the reporting, the experiencing before I even, I have to do a lot before I can get to the point where I even am thinking about putting pen to paper.
Okay.
And I will say, yeah, it's interesting I now have a nearly 2-year-old son, and I don't know how I would have done this book with a nearly 2-year-old son. I mean, there was so much, I really was just at people's beck and call. I was just available. It became clear very quickly that to really understand how this world works, I had to just put myself underfoot and be available and be ready to stay at the gallery until midnight, spackling walls, if that's what it took. And I think it's a world where there are not neat and tidy boundaries between business and pleasure. And so that also, it required a sort of just offering myself up to it. So yeah, I do think about that now, where I'm like, I'm not in the same, it's an interesting reflection, and I don't know what that means for the future, but it's certainly, I had that similar conversation with myself, which is sort of say, this is a hard project, I think, to do for me at this moment, if I had to start over in this very moment doing it again.
I think it's interesting in general to think about where the space in the art world is for, I will say parents, but I think we all know a lot of the times it's moms. And, my art internship boss, who I still do some work with, went to Hong Kong last week to see a sculpture for
Right.
the day, like not even the day. I don't even think he stayed a night there. That's something that would be so difficult for me to do, to pick up and leave my kids, even though they're 12 now and they like don't need me as much, but they really grumble when I go away. So it's,
and I don't think, I'll say, I think, sorry, I don't know, but I just say, I don't think it's only parents either, or even, people of a certain age, I think that, I was focused, I very quickly became interested in the world of up and coming artists. The art world term for them is emerging artists, right? A lot of artists that you may not have heard of yet, and perhaps you never will. But to me, these are people who are trying to elbow their way into art history. Really, it's the least covered, I think, part of the art world and the highest stakes. These are people who, selling a painting can be the difference between keeping their apartment or their studio or not, right? I mean, this is not just a question of how many zeros do we add to a price tag. And I think that it was frustrating oftentimes to hear about what they're up against, because many of these artists are working 2, 3, 4. I mean, a plethora of jobs in addition to doing the work they want to be doing, which is working on their artwork. And at the same time that they're expected to juggle these jobs, make phenomenal artwork, at the same time that they're expected to juggle these jobs and make phenomenal artwork, they're also expected to schmooze, to go up, just to go to openings, to hang out, just to hang out for hours on end, you know. And it's like there are only 24 hours in a day, right? You know, it's you at some point you're making a choice after you finish your 9 to 5. Are you going to go home and work on your artwork? Or are you going to go to the opening? Or are you going to, you know, just meander it and hope that you maybe get a chance to say a few words to the gallerist, who maybe takes the time to look up your artwork, who maybe follows up with a studio visit? I mean, it's tough. It's a weird system in a lot of ways.
Well, and you cover, you know, there's so many extremes in the art world, and you really cover those really effectively. I think you've got the artist. One bit that I found incredibly fascinating was you worked with an artist, Julie Curtis, as her studio assistant for a while. And you were explaining, in probably the clearest way I've ever seen it explained, what it actually means for an artist to have their work begin to take huge amounts of money at auction, which seems like that would be incredibly beneficial to someone who has struggled to keep the lights on and pay the bills, when actually most of them won't ever see that money. And in some cases, it can be a detriment to their career and their development. So it's this weird world with these unbelievably wealthy people who are playing in the market at these super high levels, and in some cases manipulating the market. And then the people who are trying to make the art, who are often just barely getting by.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
So.
It's a world, as someone put it, it's the art world sort of is the world that we live in, but taken to the extreme. And so I think that it has really so many lessons for us, no matter what industry that we're in. And it's just, everything is heightened, for better and for worse.
So I want to play a little game with you, Bianca, if that's okay.
Ready. I love games.
Because the of all of the things that I have been thinking about since I read your book, Mandy Allfire, and this question of what gets to be defined as art is like top of mind all the time. And so Mandy is the artist who sits on your face in this gallery that you go to. If you look her up on Instagram, which I have done, and then like immediately felt like I had done something X-rated, you know, it's very graphic, but she is a performance artist, and that is how she defines herself. And so this question,
and I should say it's at Thug Life Thick Baby. If anyone wants to look it up for themselves, it's at Thug Life Thick Baby.
I think Thick has two C's as well, right? It's like Thick, THIC. Anyway, it's
something like that.
I like
CCCK. Yeah.
You could go down this question forever. So there is that bit. And then, as you mentioned already on this podcast, you have learned to look at things and appreciate things like walls, which you might not think are art, but are beautiful in their own way. So I have 5 images for you that I would like to ask you, is this art? And maybe why?
Great.
And for those of you who are listening on audio, I'm going to describe the images. I'm going to post them up on Insta and with the show notes so you can make these decisions for yourself. Are you ready for
I'm ready.
art? Bum,
Great.
Bum, bum. We need a theme song just for this bit. Do you know, maybe sometimes I have them put the theme music in. So I'm going to say, cue theme music, guys. And they're going to put it in. And then we're going to come back. Okay. Great. I've also never shared a screen on the podcast, so this is going to be fun. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, here we go. Okay. This is can you see my screen?
I can see it.
All right. I'm starting out with a softball. Okay. Because this piece of work hangs in the Scottish National Gallery just by my house. It's one of the most recognizable Scottish paintings. It is by Henry Raeburn. It is late 18th century painting called The Skating Minister. So, Bianca, is this art?
Yeah. This is art. Yeah, let's call this art. Now, I will say, for those who can't see it, this is it's a guy who has a black coat on, what looks like a pair of Lululemon black workout pants and a black top hat. And he's got his arms crossed. He looks a little like, maybe Thomas Jefferson or something, a founding father. He's got lovely, very graceful ankles. And he's skating on this very sublime background that's just kind of this haze of like a greenish frozen pond of some kind, I assume, leading into these gray clouds, very kind of Scottish weather,
Indeed.
as far as I know.
It's accurate.
And I will say that this one, you say it's a softball, and it sort of is, because I think I was really, as I got deeper into these questions of what is art, I was really enthralled to learn that our definition of fine art, quote unquote, what we consider fine art, which, you know, we would naturally, I think, assume, oh, hey, painting, sculpture, photos begin to be a little questionable. Video art, we're like, no, but sure, yeah, they're in museums, art history departments, like toss them in. But our definition of fine art is really a relatively recent invention that's only about as old as the cuckoo clock, and it's deeply European. You know, this idea of putting boundaries around some things, some activities, and saying, okay, a painting is art, and, you know, point pillow, stuff, craft, right? There's this delineation that comes only a few hundred years ago of saying that some things are art and some things are craft. And I think that, you know, we are shaped much more, I think, than I at least realize. We are shaped by these assumptions that are actually rather arbitrary assumptions, much more than I think we realize. And so paintings, to your point, are seem like an easy definition of art because we live in the shadow of this idea of, okay, fine art means things like painting, sculpture, poetry, etc. A mug, craft, you know, stuff. Craft is sort of the nice word of saying stuff, not art stuff. So yes, I think we're going to call this painting. I'm going to call this painting art.
Okay, I would buy a mug with this guy on it, actually. Now, number two, what you say early in the book, that one of the questions that you're like never allowed to ask, or one of the things you're never allowed to say when you are looking at art, is that my child could do this. So piece number two is actually a piece by my child. So this is a drawing of a famous Pokemon named Pikachu. It is on lined paper made with colored pencil and signed by my daughter, Lola, made on the 28th of October, 2023. So even though my child did this, Bianca, is this art?
Well, we gotta get Lola a show. So I think that, you know, it's interesting. As I excavated every kind of research material that I could get my hand on to try to answer this question. I talked to gallerists. I, you know, read so much art theory, and I was interested actually that one of the Elizabeth Denny, who was a gallerist that I worked for. I remember at one point saying, when kids make quote unquote art, like, that's not really art. And I think it was her who said this. Someone said this to me, and, you know, that doesn't really resonate with me. I mean, I think that there's it feels like an arbitrary distinction. And like, I was the other day at a preschool and looked at the wall, and I mean, the way that these children had painted their portraits was incredible. I mean, there was an attitude. It really made me think differently about, like, a tongue. It made me think differently about hair. I mean, there was one person who made their portrait, and it looked sort of like a balding clown eating a pill, like pill popping or something. And I was like, wow, like, I don't know who, you know, this, you know, Amanda kid is, but she's an artist, right? Like, there's something really great. And I think that, you know, like, I think that something can certainly be made by a kid and be art. You know, I don't think it's sort of crazy to have a cutoff that, like, it's art up until you turn 18. So, like I said, let's get Lola a show.
All right. This is for sale. Podcast.
And I will say there's something here, like, for example, like, just for those who can't see it, the hands are different on this Pikachu. There's something really cool. Like, one of the hands is like a sort of a zigzaggy, like, there's so much here that you can really engage with and look at. And I started to think that art is also not only what the artist is putting forth, but what we as a viewer are bringing to the experience. I started to think that art is really this handshake between, you know, an artist, someone putting something forth and saying, hey, I think this is art to me, and us as the viewer coming to it and saying, I'm going to pick up where you left off and think, yes, this is art. Now, I do think there's moments also where we can look at everyday things with an art eye and watch them transform us in that moment, hence staring at white walls. But we can get more to that.
So what did gallerists get? 50% commission. If you sell Lola's piece, I'll give you 50% of that.
Okay.
Okay, so for my third one, I had to go with a piece of performance art because the line between performance art and other things, and in the case of Mandy Allfire, pornography, is also a little bit true, I think, in the case of this next artist, but she's been legitimized by retrospectives and museums around the world. I just went to see her, the exhibition of her work at the Royal Academy a few weeks ago. And so it's Marina Abramovich. Here she is with Ulay. And this is a performance that they did in 1977, which was reenacted in 2010. It is called Imponderabilia. And to describe it for you, two performers are standing completely naked in a doorway, and the public must squeeze through them in order to pass. And I guess they have to choose which way to face. I feel like this is definitely a sideways squeeze through. Abramovich is very, very well known for her boundary pushing performance art. So is this art?
Yes, I think this is art. I think this is a really interesting example because I actually write about this example in reference to trying to grapple with what Mandy Allfire is doing. And so for a little context, just for those who don't know, so Mandy Allfire, Amanda Alfieri is her offline name. She has an MFA from Columbia. She has shown at incredibly esteemed arts venues. And for her and she does these very immersive performance pieces that can last hours, weeks, years in some cases. And so when I met her, she was in the midst of this ongoing performance piece where she was performing as an ass influencer on Instagram. So essentially she had looked around and was really interested in the ways that women were developing, these massive followings, I mean, millions of followers, for posting these sort of fetishy photos of different parts of their bodies, hence ass influencers. And she was particularly interested in the ass, in our butts. And so she actually began to embody this persona of Mandy Allfire, an ass influencer, and really went so far as to just, change her body. I mean, initially it was everything from, doing incredibly aggressive workouts to try and get this thick physique to build up her body in the way that she saw other people doing on Instagram. And then lately, she's even taken, cosmetic surgery interventions. And for her, this work is an investigation of so many different things. I'm not going to do justice in the moment, but I had met her because she was doing this performance where she had invited her followers to come to a gallery for a live face sitting where she was going to, quote, sit on them until they can't take it anymore. And so this Abramovich piece reminds me a bit of that because there is this sense of the artist putting their naked or nearly naked form in contact with these viewers, I don't know if you can even call them viewers at that stage, but these people at a gallery, and sort of making them engage with it. And, I think that I think this piece is interesting because it raises to me this also question of context. And so in the art world, I had come from this background of, training as a sommelier where I did a lot of blind tasting, and blind tasting a glass of wine means you sit down in front of it and you have to disregard all this other information that's designed to play to your sensory biases. All you have to go off is the glass of wine in front of you. You can't think about price. It's, you don't know the price, right? But really blind tasting is about training yourself to kind of ignore context, to ignore things like price, like the reputation of the winemaker, and really try and stay true to this experience. And I was so fascinated in the art world. People who knew a lot about art began to basically inform me that the erudite way of looking at art is actually to pay attention to all the context. Is really that it's not just about looking at the piece of work. It's that cloud of names. Context is really that cloud of names attached to it. So what museums have they showed at? What galleries have they showed at? Who bought their work? Who are they friends with? What school did they go to? And I can't say that sit very well with me. I found that a bit unsettling. Here I wanted to really understand art, and people were telling me, well, to understand art, you have to understand all the stuff around the art, but the art, you'll get to it. It's sort of what I felt like. And so I think this piece is interesting because we see the power of context, right? It's like if these two artists were just standing naked on the side of a street, they'd probably get arrested, right? But because they're standing naked at the entrance to a museum, we call it art. And so I think Mandy's work also raises these questions. A lot of what she's doing isn't in the context of a gallery. And so it becomes even more slippery to say, like, is it art? So, but yeah, I think this is art.
Amazing. So I'm going to put 4 and 5 together because I think context is the question for these final 2 I have for you. So number 4 is a piece that you reference in your book. It is called Comedian. Is a 2019 artwork by Maurizio Catalan, and it sold for $120,000. And for those of you at home, this is a banana, and it is duct taped to a wall with a piece of duct tape at a kind of jaunty angle. So this is number 4, and number 5 is a picture I took in my kitchen this morning of a satsuma on the counter. It's not taped to anything, which is maybe why it's not art. But you've got some nice shadow. You can see me. You can see me holding the phone in the background, and you can see my paper towel roll, which is needing to be replaced shortly. But when I look at the banana on the wall and the satsuma on the counter, I question: are both of these things art? Is one of these things art? Are none of these things art? So, Bianca, what is your definitive answer for these 2 pieces of art?
So, okay, well, I have to say first, you're not talking about the photograph being an art. You're talking about
correct.
This, like,
the actual
yes. Satsuma.
This
on
is not. This is a screenshot from Google, so I don't think that's art.
So one thing that I found really fascinating as I, again, tried to wrestle with these questions that we're asking in the course of this game, was that there is this group of scientists who essentially argue that art is essential, right? That art is not just something that we began doing once we figured out how to live beyond age 20, but really something that has been critical to the survival of humans as a species. And if you think about it, we invented paint, I think, before the wheel. We certainly were painting and drawing long before we learned how to write. We painted, I think one of the earliest figurative paintings that was done, which is a portrait of a warty pig. It was done long before we figured out how to heal wounds. And so there's something very interesting about the fact that humans were drawn to creating paintings, to making these things that we now consider art. And art is slippery, right? It's hard. It's like, do we call our cave paintings art? It's hard to know, of course, the purpose that those served and how people at the time looked at them, unless we can somehow bring, one of these cavemen that we find, in a bog somewhere. Unless we can bring them back to life and interview them. Yeah, right. There's still time. But these scientists and these researchers that have looked at this have come up with various explanations for why art may have contributed to our survival of the species, from why it may be this universal instinct that is a fundamental part of being human. And one of the ideas that I came to as part of this was this idea that we should stop treating art as a thing, but rather treat it as a behavior. And so I think that a lot of us, when we talk about like what is art, we start from the point of view of an object, right? A photograph, a banana on a wall, a drawing on a piece of paper. And the argument this woman, Ellen Dissanayake, makes is that really art is behavior. It's the product of what she calls making special. So art is anything that results from this sort of several kind of key behaviors where we elevate something, or we kind of codify it, or we make it special, we make it distinct, we set it apart. And so as part of her definition of art, art is everything from it could be an Instagram ass influencer, it could be a Super Bowl celebration, it could be a video game. And so I think that as for whether, I do think that the the comedian, the banana taped to a wall, is art. And I think that for your piece, it's hard to know without being in situ, I guess, and seeing it. But I think that I'm open to the possibility of it being art, depending on if it's just like if you just kind of like happen to throw it there, but if you've sort of like maybe cleared a space on your counter and it's like you've put it there as this object that we think about or contemplate, like I'm open to us having an artistic experience with it, right? Like I do think that there's something to be gained from looking at a painting in a museum, but I think there's also something to be gained from thoughtfully contemplating this Satsuma that you have stuck there. I mean, even as I'm looking at it now, there's this amazing kind of like buttony effect going on. I think it's the, like I've never really taken the time to sit and think about a Satsuma. And I think that, you certainly see, in different cultures, again, different definitions of what is the kind of objects, the kind of experiences that we can have that give us the sort of amazing glitch in our brains that art delivers. And I think that's the other piece of this that I think is really critical is, when we think about why art is important to our lives, there's research that shows that when we look at the world, a lot of us, when we look at we're very unreliable seers, right? We have these filters of expectation that descend. Our brains are already ignoring a lot of information even before it gets to our brains. And art arguably introduces this glitch. It's this moment where it kind of snaps us out of what we're used to doing. It reminds us that the assumptions that we make about the world may be wrong. It keeps our brains from really overfitting to the data. It keeps them nimble, it keeps them flexible. And so art introduces this really beautiful glitch that kind of causes our brains to do a hiccup and say, wait, maybe, I don't know, like maybe in that first painting, right, that you get, like maybe, clouds do seamlessly meld with a frozen lake. Maybe a banana stuck to a wall is art. Or in this case, maybe, I don't know, like a Satsuma can make us reflect on color differently. And so I'm open to having an artistic experience with this, just as I'm open to having an artistic experience with a hot dog cart or seats on the subway. I think it really just depends on the perspective that we bring to it and keeping an open mind.
Well, I was open to eating that as a snack, so it was delicious.
And you can do that too.
I did. Well, I did. And that would have been a performance, I think, actually. So, I mean, I really cannot say enough, Bianca, how much I loved your book. Get the Picture, a mind-bending journey among the inspired artists and obsessive art fiends who taught me how to see is out now. It will make you think. It will make you laugh. It will have you staring at walls and putting Satsumas on your counter. I cannot wait for everybody to read it so I can talk to everyone about it. Bianca, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. I mean, how did I do in the game? Did I win? Did I lose? I don't know.
You won.
I guess we'll wait. All right, we'll see. We'll let
I wanted you to say that everything was art, and I feel like you did. So, but this is a part of what you do so well in this book is it has made me also look at things differently. And I think this idea that we can look at anything and try to figure out what it is by looking it's really beautiful and necessary. So I'm grateful to you for writing this book and for coming on this podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have had the chance to discuss with you. And thanks for the challenge. I love it. And let me know when Lola has her opening.